All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about why you probably would have voted for Adolf Hitler. Yes, you probably would have voted for Adolf Hitler. And I know that this may sound shocking to some of you guys, but it's true. Oh, that's not true, Theodore. I would have never voted for Adolf Hitler. I watched Schindler's List. You probably would have voted for Adolf Hitler, and if Hitler ever comes back, you'll probably vote for him. Why do I say this? Well, look at the state of conservatism right now. Look at its state. Look at its condition. It is so weird, and every single year it gets more and more unhinged. You have people praising German nationalism. Americans! You have American conservatives praising German nationalism. And here I am thinking, you guys have seen the films. You guys have seen Schindler's List and all these movies. You guys have heard about the Holocaust for your entire lives, going all the way back to kindergarten. All right, you've been hearing about the Nazi Holocaust, the German orchestrated Holocaust, and here you are praising German nationalism. Oh, it's so great. German nationalists, they're getting more and more powerful, so based, so awesome, so trad, so wonderful. This is great. I love it. It's amazing. German nationalism, so awesome. It's so based. And you look at the AfD party, the Alternative for Deutschland party, which is the German nationalist party that is now officially a mainstream party. It is now one of the biggest parties in Germany. And you see that it has, for a leader, a man named Björn Höcke, a man who has expressed his animosity towards Holocaust memorials. AfD has a leader who was caught literally dancing on top of a Holocaust memorial. They talk about social Darwinism. They had one member who was secretly wishing for Adolf Hitler to come back, and she said, "Oh, I love you, Adolf Hitler. Please come back. We need you. We miss you. I need you. We all need you. All of the fatherland needs you." And people are praising the fact that this party has been growing in popularity, has been growing immensely in popularity. And I'm thinking, I'm living in the Twilight Zone. Like, what is, this is crazy. It's so crazy. It's insane what is going on. And this is the state of conservatism. It's come to the point where we are praising German nationalism. And it's not just that. The world clapped its hands as the Chancellor of Germany back in 2022, Olaf Scholz, announced that Germany was going to be boosting its military spending, that Germany was going to be reinvigorating its military strength. People were applauding this. They were clapping their hands. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm living in the Twilight Zone. People know about World War II. They know about World War I. And here they are praising the revival of Germany. For the life of me, I don't know how anybody or why anybody would trust Germany. It's like trusting Iran. Oh, that's not true. Oh, because Iran, they're Islamic fanatics. Well, look at the history of Germany. It's like looking at somebody who has a huge criminal record and then saying, well, you know, it's different now. That's how dumb this is. And this is the state of conservatism. So looking at the state of conservatism, looking at the state of much of the world right now, how nationalism is reviving at a global level, it started in the East. We first heard about this taking place in India with the rise of Narendra Modi, and Japan with the rise of Shinzo Abe. Shinzo Abe became the most popular prime minister, the most consistently voted for prime minister in probably in all of the modern history of Japan. And then we started seeing it spreading into Europe with the rise of all of these different right-wing parties, be it in Belgium, be it in Germany with the AfD, be it in Spain with Vox, be it in Sweden with the Sweden Democrats. Oh, and this is so crazy. The Sweden Democrats, right? It's a big right-wing party in Sweden, the biggest right-wing party in that country. The party was literally founded by members of the SS. Literally, it was literally founded by actual Nazis, not people who the liberals accuse of being Nazis, not people who the mainstream media accuses of being Nazis. No, no, no. Founded by actual, literal freaking Nazis. And you have people like Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller who praise this sort of thing. Pamela Geller, a Jew, by the way. She praises this sort of thing. She's been praising this garbage for a very long time. And Robert Spencer has actually traveled to Sweden to speak for the Sweden Democrats, a party founded by Nazis. And if you confront people about these things, people don't want to face up to it. They'll say things like, oh, well, they have to fight radical Islam. Do you know when we saw this type of thing before? We saw it when the Nazis were rising. This is the type of stuff that was going on before the Nazis took power. We need to support the Nazis. Why? Because of the rise of communism. And today people say we need to support Nazis. Why? Because of the rise of the left, who they will say are communists, and the rise of the of mass migration from the third world. And if you look at, let's look at some of the history. Some of that history from before the time when Hitler took power. People talk about the rise of Hitler, and this is what I hate about a lot of the historical mainstream narrative about the rise of Adolf Hitler. They'll say, like, I've seen a couple of documentaries about the rise of Hitler, and they're not really very helpful. I mean, they're very well done. They're very well edited. They have the footage, the black and white footage of Hitler speaking, and a huge crowd is Sieg Heiling, and then they have some historian with an accent saying, oh, well, you know, he was very good at elating their minds. He was very good at really intoxicating them with his charisma and his amazing rhetorical skills. And with this ability, he was able to just mass manipulate an entire nation. Hitler, and they show Hitler talking, and, you know, the marches and the torches. But you have to ask yourself, how did people come to this point? Because what they'll say is, well, it was because of the aftermath of World War I, right? World War I brought about a lot of devastation to the German country. A lot of people died because of World War I. Tons of people died, not just soldiers, but a lot of civilians died. Tons of people even starved to death. And then after the war, the currency of Germany became pretty much worthless. There was massive amounts of poverty. So people will say this was the state where, you know, Hitler took power. People were miserable, and because they were miserable, they voted for Adolf Hitler. So they voted for Adolf Hitler because of the poverty and because of the bad economy, because of the fact that their currency was worth nothing. And this was the reason why. This is not an adequate explanation, in my opinion. Yes, it does partially explain the rise of Adolf Hitler and the rise of the Nazis, but it's not the full explanation. Because if World War I was the only reason, well, how do you explain the hatred towards the Jews? Because they were thousands of Jews who fought for Germany in World War I. Yes, there were a lot of German Jews who fought for Germany in World War I. And so how could you make the argument from World War I that the Jews were the enemy, or the main enemy, the biggest enemy of Germany? And here is the thing. When you look at the electoral history of the Nazi Party, you'll see that when they first began, they weren't popular. They weren't popular at all. It took a while for them to gain a substantial amount of votes. It took a while for them to gain immense amounts of popularity. It took time. So if it was just, if it was just because of the devastation of World War I, then why didn't the Nazis win big right after the war? They didn't. The Social Democrats dominated the politics in Germany after World War I. Why wasn't it the Nazis? And why were there big liberals who were gaining a lot of popularity? Why was leftism very popular? Why was even things like feminism very popular? Why was Why did, or how did communism gain popularity in Germany after World War One, if what people really wanted right after World War One was a leader like Adolf Hitler? Ugh, my speaking skills are declining at this moment. If it was just World War One, if it was just the devastation that World War One brought to Germany, then Hitler should have won big. The Nazis should have won big right after the war. It wasn't as if people just started blaming the Jews right after World War One. That took time. That took indoctrination. That took mass manipulation. So it took a lot of work for the Nazis to gain popularity. The question is, how did people all of a sudden turn to the Nazis as their saviors? You can't just attribute this to the devastation of World War One, because if that were the case, they would have won big right after World War One. No, it took time. It took time. And I believe the reason for this, I believe that the reason why people turned against the Jews, I believe that the reason why people began to vote for the Nazis was because of the rise of communist terror. I'm not saying this is the only reason. I'm saying that this is either the main reason, or it's definitely one of the main reasons as to why the Nazis got so popular. Because if you look at what was happening in Germany before World War II, before the rise of the Third Reich, communists were actually committing terrorist attacks. Communists were inflicting on Germany a reign of terror. And there was a lot of communist terrorism. And I'm going to give you guys an example here. So, here's one example about left-wing or communist terrorists. And there was something in Germany called the Spartacist movement. And the Spartacist movement was an organization, it was a terrorist organization that consisted of both communist and left-wingers. And they joined forces in the aspiration to take over Germany. They actually wanted to take over Germany, and their goal was to get Germany to become a communist state that would be a part of the Soviet Union, or at least, under communist rule. So it says here, and this is a book that I started reading. It's called The Third Reich by Michael Berle, and this has been a very informative read, I must say. I'm liking this book because it doesn't give you the typical explanation as to the rise of the Third Reich. It doesn't say, oh, well, Hitler just rose up because people thought he was cool and he was a great speaker, and he doesn't say things like people turned against the Jews because, well, they just woke up in the morning and decided to. He gives you the events that the Nazis used to gain popularity. He gives you the actual, he describes to you terrorist events, or events of left-wing / communist terrorism, to show you what was happening before Germany, or before Germany became Nazi, to show you the types of things that were happening, to show you the types of events that the Nazis would use to get people to vote for them. And so it says here that armed demonstrators occupied the offices of leading newspapers, including the Social Democrat organ Vorwärts, in an attempt to destroy freedom of the press and to prevent the summoning of a constituent assembly. So left-wing terrorists were taking over the offices of mainstream newspapers because they wanted to control free speech. Now imagine today seeing left-wing fanatics, woke SJWs, pro-Palestine, let's say, SJWs, taking over the offices of mainstream newspapers like the New York Times, mainstream outlets like the BBC, etc., because they want those outlets to say what they want to say, right? They want those outlets to convey a particular message. People today would be saying, look at these left-wing bastards, these left-wing lunatics. We need some based right-wing death squads to take care of them. People would be saying stuff like that. People would be saying stuff like that, right? And guess what? That's what happened. That's what happened. What was the response to these left-wing terrorists controlling these offices? It says here, to restore order, Gustav Noske, the defense minister, decided to deploy volunteer Free Corps, as well as the regular army and troops avowedly loyal to the Republic. The Free Corps, known in German as Freikorps, something like that, were heavily right-wing volunteer fighters, and a lot of these guys would end up becoming Nazis. So here you had these left-wing fanatics, they're controlling media offices, newspaper offices, and the government deploys these right-wing volunteer fighters. If this were happening today, people would be saying, oh my gosh, so based, so awesome. And if you were to say, wait a second, something's not right here, we could be looking at a right-wing surge. How dare you say that? These left-wing terrorists need to be taken out, and you're going against the very forces that are taking them out. How dare you? And it's like, well, no, I'm not supporting these leftists. I'm not saying that they're great. I don't support the left wing at all. What I am saying is that the danger of the left, just like the danger of Islamic terrorism, could be used to justify another evil. And people use evil things to justify other evils. People do this all the time. And we've seen this before. The CIA and other NATO intelligence agencies did this with communist terrorism back during the Cold War. It was called Operation Gladio. You can look this up. It's been very well documented. It's not a conspiracy theory, even though it's sometimes laughed at as a conspiracy theory, but it is not. It's very well documented. Gladio was all about using left-wing terrorism in Europe as a way to foment and to spark far-right nationalism in Europe. And NATO was backing and arming far-right paramilitaries, neo-Nazi paramilitaries, because it wanted to create a far-right movement in Europe that would fight against the left-wing followers of the Soviet Union, the left-wing fans of the Soviet Union, and to fight the Soviet Union in the case of a Soviet invasion of Europe. So I don't think that this has really changed all that much. I think intelligence agencies are still doing things like this. I don't have exact proof for it. I don't have a white paper that says, yes, this is what we're doing. But looking at the history of the Cold War, I suspect that that is taking place today. That terrorism is used as a way to foment nationalism. And yeah, you look at this history and you see, okay, there were left-wing terrorists, they were left-wing fanatics, they were being violent in those days, and the Nazis rose up. And people supported the Nazis. That's why I say that you probably would have voted for Adolf Hitler. Because so many, and it's amazing, for so many years I've been talking, since 2016. It's been a while, guys. Since 2016, I've been warning people about the rise of the right. I've been warning people about the rise of nationalism. And people have been watching my videos for a while, and people still come up to me and say, oh, Theodore, isn't it great? Like the nationalists, yeah, look how great they are. And I'm thinking, why in the hell? Like, am I actually getting into people's heads? Am I penetrating anything, right? Am I penetrating anybody's brains here? Because it's like no matter what I tell people, I still have people telling me about how great German nationalism is, how great it is that German nationalism is coming back. And I'm thinking, how can people be so willfully self-deceptive? How could people so willfully deceive themselves, so willfully blind themselves to the point where they know, they acknowledge, they are aware of the destructive history of German nationalism, but then they see the revival of German nationalism and say, oh, this is good. And if you tell them about the parallels between the German nationalism of today and the German nationalism of the Nazis, they will say, no, today it's different. So then you ask them, okay, what is the difference? And they will say, well, the Nazis rose up and they took power and were very popular, and the popularity was something that came from deception. They deceived the masses into voting for them, into revering them and supporting them. Whereas today, these German nationalists, the AfD and what have you, they're speaking the truth. They're speaking the truth, and people are tired of the Lügenpresse, they're tired of the lying media, and they are looking for government officials who will truly represent the people, and the only people who are hearing their voices, the only ones who are hearing the voices of the Volk, or the folk, are the AfD and these nationalists. You would have literally said the same exact thing when Hitler was campaigning to take power in the German government. You would have been saying the same damn thing. You would have been telling me, well, Theodore, because think about it. Here we are, right? It's after World War I. And I see the rise of the Nazis, and you see the rise of the Nazis. And I say, this isn't good. Look, these Nazis are very destructive. And you would say, no. Theodore, you're wrong. The leftists are very destructive in Germany. There is a communist threat right next to Germany. Russia is right near Germany. The Russians, the communists, the Soviets, they want to take over Germany. You have left-wingers who want to see Germany be under the Soviet Union. They want to see Germany be under a foreign left-wing power. The Soviets are mass murderers. These leftists in Germany actually have killed people. They are terrorists. They are against freedom of speech. And the only people who are really fighting against these leftists are the Nazis. The only people who are fighting against these communists are the Nazis. And so the people are voting for the only political party that's actually hearing them. So, and then I would say, well, wait a second, World War I. We just had World War I. The world has just gotten done with fighting against Germany, and because Germany was trying to take over all of Europe. And you're telling me that the revival of German nationalism is good? And you would say, well, this time it's different. But what's happening right now, what's happening right now in our world, right? This world that we live in after World War II. Here I am saying, look at World War II. Do you really want to see a revival of German nationalism? And you're telling me what? This time it's different. There's the left. There's mass migration. The left in Germany is trying to get their country, get the fatherland, Deutschland, to be invaded by foreigners. And the only people who are listening are the AfD. The only people who are listening are the nationalists. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. People don't realize that they are literally in the devil's playground. These people are in the devil's playground. It's like Satan is telling God right now, hey, God, you know that Nazism stuff that I created? Yeah, I'm going to bring it back. People are so dumb. They're so oblivious. I'm just going to bring it back and people will follow it. Okay, yeah. People don't realize that they are in the devil's playground. Here is another example from this book. And it talks about how communists took over Bavaria, the region of Bavaria in Germany. Power was briefly seized by the communists who proclaimed a Bavarian Soviet Republic. This is what was happening before the Nazis took over. Bavaria got taken over by communists. And you can see why people voted for Hitler. You can see how it happened. You can see how they gained popularity. Actual communists took over Bavaria. So they proclaimed a Bavarian Soviet Republic. Their leader, Eugene Levine, that's his name, Eugene Levine, that is one of the most Jewish names I've ever heard in my life. Eugene Levine, a Jewish communist, took over Bavaria. How? And people watch Schindler's List, and the girlfriend cries on her boyfriend's shoulder and says, how could people have allowed this to happen? Why would people vote for this Hitler guy? How could people have allowed this? How could this been allowed? How could people have voted for this monster? Look at the history. Jewish communist terrorists took over an entire region of Germany. The Nazis took stories like this and they said, You see, this is the enemy, the Jew. I'm not saying that they were correct. I'm not saying that every Jew was a communist. Obviously, that's not true. It's obviously not true that that every Jew was a communist, right? Obviously, that's not true. And I'm not affirming Nazi propaganda. But what I am saying is that events like these were used by the Nazis to get people to hate the Jews. And the Nazis said, we will fight this enemy for you. And people voted for the Nazis. Just like not every single migrant is a terrorist, not every single immigrant is a terrorist, but you have politicians who point to migrants or they point to immigrants and say, look, they're invading our country. Do you see what I'm saying? That's exactly the type of propaganda strategy that politicians use today, right-wing politicians will use today. Those people are invading us. Those immigrants are destroying us. They are the enemy of our people. And then people vote for those politicians. This is why I say that you probably would have voted for Adolf Hitler, because you would have been alive in Germany in those days, or you could have been an American. It's possible you could have been here in the U.S. at that time. I don't know. I don't know where your recent ancestry comes from. A lot of people, their ancestry comes from Europe, and their great-grandparents moved here at some point. So I don't know where you would be, but maybe you would be in America. But you would have been looking at that, at these situations. You would have been looking at Germany, and you would be saying, "Oh, look at those wonderful nationalists. They're there to fight against the enemies of their country." And this is the reason why you had people in England who were praising Adolf Hitler. You had Americans who were praising Adolf Hitler. This is the reason why you'll see a picture of a British woman saying, Hitler, I want your baby. I mean, that's the reason why. Guys, it's not that complicated. This is why people fell for the Nazis. A lot of people today would have fallen for the Nazis. A lot of people. Okay, so it says, their leader, Eugene Levine, received the blessing of Lenin. So here you have communist Jewish terrorists taking over an entire region of Germany. And he is working for Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was another communist Jew who was running the Soviet Union. And Lenin was a mass murderer. Lenin was a monster. So here you have, let's see. Here you have a communist Jewish terrorist, Eugene Levine. He's working for a mass murderer who's also a communist Jew named Vladimir Lenin. And this is the reason why people voted for Adolf Hitler. You just look at this situation, you can see, okay, yeah, that's why people... That's the reason why they didn't vote for the Nazis right after World War I, right? It wasn't like, right after World War I, we're in poverty, we're poor, we're hungry, we've just been defeated, we need Adolf Hitler, we need a leader. That didn't happen right after World War I. It took time. It took events like this for people to want to vote for the Nazis. It wasn't just World War I, everybody. It wasn't just the devastation of World War I that Hitler took power. So it says here that he received the blessing of Lenin, who characteristically wished to know how many bourgeoisie hostages had been taken. A classist tone was soon apparent. Milk shortages were rationalized with the argument, what does it matter? Most of it goes to the children of the bourgeoisie anyway. We are not interested in keeping them alive. No harm if they die. They'd only grow into enemies of the proletariat. So here you had this communist Jew named Eugene Levine takes over Bavaria, and there was a milk shortage, and Eugene Levine says, who cares if there's a milk shortage? If babies die, who cares? Because they're just the babies of the wealthy. They're the babies of the proletariat. And this is one of the reasons why it was events like this, that led people into voting for Adolf Hitler. Why do people vote for the AfD? A lot of it has to do with immigration, terrorism, acts of violence done by individual migrants. History doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it sure as hell rhymes. And who fought against these communists? Who liberated Bavaria from these communist terrorists? It was the Freikorps. right-wing volunteer fighters who would later on support Adolf Hitler. So there you have it. There you have it. So it was right-wing volunteer fighters who eventually drove these communists out. And it was the rise of communist terrorism that got people to a great extent to vote for Adolf Hitler and to support Adolf Hitler. And if you were alive today, you would be looking at this situation saying, oh my gosh, so based, so awesome. Bring these amazing right-wing death squads to get rid of these communists. We need the right-wing death squads. That's exactly what people would be saying right now if this situation happened today. And this is why I say that you probably would have voted for Adolf Hitler. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.